Welcome to the Transcendent Minds podcast, the podcast where we explore the mysteries of the mind and the human experience. Join us as we delve into topics such as consciousness, spirituality, and personal growth with expert guests and thought-provoking discussions. Get ready to expand your mind and discover new insights on this journey of self-discovery. Now here's your host, Peter Michael Deeds. In the intricate dance of existence, Ginny Hoyt invites us to explore the profound interplay between the physical and the metaphysical. Grounded in the belief that the body serves as a conduit for the spirit, Ginny unveils the somatic vision, a holistic perspective that recognizes the interconnectedness of soul and body. From the energetic vibrations that permeate our being to the creation of blocks that hinder our flow, Ginny challenges us to transcend conventional boundaries and embrace the innate wisdom that resides within. So over the course of 7 insightful episodes, we will delve deep into the realms of body, mind, and spirit, exploring the profound interplay between our physical sensations, emotional experiences, and spiritual insights. And in our first episode together, titled The Somatic Vision, we will unravel the mysteries of somatic awareness and delve into the concept of the body as a conduit for spiritual expression. From the separation of soul and body to the creation of energetic blocks, we'll explore how somatic practice can facilitate healing and transformation on a profound level. And moving forward, we will be exploring other topics such as awakening the mind-body connection, embodied awareness, how you can tune in, and building your somatic foundation. And each episode will offer practical insights and transformative practices to help you cultivate greater presence, resilience, and self-awareness in your daily life. And as we journey together, we'll also navigate the pitfalls of spiritual and somatic traps, exploring concepts such as spiritual bypassing, the ego, and the stories that keep us trapped in patterns of suffering. And through honest inquiry and deep introspection, we will uncover the keys to unlocking our true potential and living with greater authenticity and purpose. So join us on this extraordinary adventure as we explore the depths of somatic wisdom and discover the power of embodied consciousness to transform our lives from within. So get ready to embark on a journey of self-discovery, healing, and empowerment, unlike any other, with Ginny Hoyt. So welcome to the world of somatic practice, where transformation begins within. Ginny, welcome to the Transcendent Minds podcast.
Thank you so much. That was such a beautiful introduction. Yeah, thank you for letting me come on here and share that message of blending spirituality with somatics. I'm really excited to be able to spread this out over 7 episodes and really create a deep and impactful conversation.
Beautiful. Can you give us a brief background?
Yeah, so I am a somatic practitioner, which means that I am all about diving into the subconscious patterns that develop from early life experience that shape the perspectives that we use to navigate the world around us today. So it's like uncovering those blind spots that can keep us feeling trapped in stories that we know are outdated, that we can recognize are holding us back, but feel really hazy to working past and liberating ourselves from.
Can you elaborate on the concept of the body as a conduit for the spirit? How does this perspective challenge traditional notions of selfhood and identity?
Absolutely. I think that conversation gets to start with ego, which is something that is a word I think gets thrown around a lot. I think it's really important to clarify what exactly it is that we're talking about when we bring that up. But it's self-identification. It's almost that little voice that narrates your experience inside of your mind that convinces you of the way that you're perceiving the world around you is the truth. It's the judgment we use to make sense of the world around us and the behaviors of other people. And I think that for a lot of people, our experience and the ego it's one and the same, that we think we're very identified with the stories that we tell ourselves. So there really isn't too much separation between intuition, our bodies, the reality of the natural world around us, and the part that we play in it. And those things are actually very separate things. What I would love to paint the vision of in this conversation is recognizing the power that the body holds and being able to develop more of that witness perspective. It doesn't mean so much for me to say these things, but to create a conversation where I can paint examples for people to take this into their own personal lives and find the evidence of these things themselves, to recognize how much more spaciousness they can find within themselves to see these patterns and to be witnesses to these parts of themselves that perhaps previously we just felt so identified with that it was hard to recognize that these things were there, because they are the filter that we're looking at the world through. And I think that alone is a really big change in the conversation of how most people relate to themselves or move through the world. So that's the goal that I'm going into this conversation today with, is to really help people find some spaciousness within themselves and just so much of the wisdom and the intelligence that the body has, and how much knowledge it can provide to us, and liberation from suffering when we can learn to engage with it in a way that is respectful of what it brings to the table, and learning how to connect with the gifts that it can provide.
What a beautiful explanation. And I liken the body to a straw, in terms of when you look at a straw and when it's clogged, we've all had the experience of trying to suck through a straw where you can't get material, the liquid, through the straw because it's clogged. And our bodies seem to be a bit like that many a time throughout our lives. Taking the analogy of the straw, I'm looking at energetic blocks. So how do those blocks, or that restriction of flow, manifest in our lives, and what role do they play in disrupting the natural flow of energy within our bodies?
Yeah, I love that analogy of the straw. I have a similar analogy too that kind of points to that same thing of the body being the conduit, that the body is really a tool. I like looking at it as a partner in this life, that as we're having this conversation, you're picking up cues from my body language or listening to the words that are coming from my voice. But really, what the connection is behind there is the soul that is the force behind all of these motions that my body is going through to convey meaning, where we're souls connecting, not so much people and bodies, but the body is a tool to help make those points of connection. And the analogy that I like to use for this is thinking of the body a radio, that a radio does not generate music, but it tunes into the frequencies that music is at, that music can flow through it. And that music is what I liken to being like soul or spirit. That feels really poetic and beautiful, that I think is likened to the magic of what that is, to be a spirit engaging in this plane. Energetic blocks are formed when the ego comes in, where we like to control, we like to make sense of things, and that's not always in accordance with how the world forms around us, that it can be very magical, mysterious, and we don't have to understand how everything is going to play out as it does. But there is a very real part of us that wants to and feels that it's very important to. It's when we interfere and have attachment to understanding and are searching for that sense of control, or I know better than what is the direction that I'm being forced to. And we put down our roots and we sink into what we think we need to be doing or saying, or what other people need to be doing. That can be a part of creation in those blocks. Another source of that, as well as something I referenced to earlier, is early life experiences, that because humans operate in this way where we do have this ego, and as young people, we are raised by humans who are all very flawed by nature, that there are points in early life experience where emotional needs are not met in the ways that we feel we need them to be, to maintain this state of homeostasis, of safety, that we are loved and cared for and seen and appreciated and respected in our environment at all times. It's not going to happen. People are people, and that's okay. But that does result in contraction of the body, that there's something inside of us that feels like it's not being met, that we feel unsafe or unsure. And so our bodies compensate for that with the creation of some of these blocks, these self-protective mechanisms, to help us respond to the uncertainty in our environments. And that those patterns get strengthened with time and built upon through years of practice that just helps shape the people that we become in older age, and play out those patterns of things that we know might not be totally serving us into adulthood, but we just know this is the way that I've shown up to these types of problems all my life. And I don't really know how to do things differently, or I don't feel like I have the skill set to break out of what has been my practiced reality for all this time.
It reminds me of an analogy of when you're behind the camera, you're trying to manage the scene of your life. When it doesn't meet your expectations, then you outsource to the extras, as distinct from you being the main actor on the stage of your life who's written the script and able to deliver that script with the person that you want to become. You've invited us to reconsider the origins of our thoughts and experiences. And as we explore the vast expanse of consciousness, you also encourage us to embrace the notion that everything is energy, a dynamic force that shapes our perceptions and our beliefs and our behaviors. When we acknowledge the separation of soul and body, we gain insight into the intricate web of energetic vibrations that animate our existence and create the foundation for our lived experiences. How do you conceptualize the separation of soul and body, and what implications does this perspective have for our understanding of self-awareness and consciousness?
I think this is a really big shift from moving away from self-judgment when we can create that spaciousness between mind and body and the language of the body, of understanding that there is a very intelligent reason why my body decided to compensate in the way that it did, that created this pattern that, while now feels suffocating perhaps, was derived from a place of tremendous self-love at one point, that the body wanted you to survive and wanted you to feel safe and secure. And when you're at a place where you don't have as much control, the means that you have to respond are fairly limited. So it did the best that it could to create a strategy that would provide that to you. When we can recognize that and learn to start interacting with the body and pulling back those layers into diving into what process took place way back then that my body decided to do to show up for me, it really just melts away so much constriction or resentment. And I know that was a huge part of my journey, that I just felt so much internal resentment towards myself for the ways that I was showing up that I knew were holding me back. And I felt like I just couldn't tolerate it. There was so much constriction within my body of, this is all I've ever known, but it's holding me back in so many ways. And I know that this is not the most authentic portrayal of who I am as a person now. It created a lot of inner turmoil and inner conflict. And it wasn't until I got to learn what goes on behind the curtain, or what my body went through, that really showed me that was such a tremendous act of self-love for it to act in the way that it did. It made me understand and be able to connect the dots of how I ended up in the places that I did with the experiences that I went through. It feels very open and very spacious, and really let me let go of so much of that conflict, that helped create some space for that healing to come in, that it makes sense what happened. It makes sense that my body responded the way that it did. And I think that's a piece that a lot of people are missing out on. I think a lot of people feel really mystified in the ways that they show up or compensate, or the patterns that they've developed for themselves of, this obviously isn't serving me, or it's not good for me, so why do I keep doing it? And feeling like there's some sense of brokenness, or that they just don't make sense for doing what they do, when there is always a very logical reason for how we've developed the way that we are. And it is a matter of patience and simply learning the language of how to connect with the body to be able to put those pieces together and make those types of connections. But I find that sense of constriction and contraction of inner resentment is something that a lot of people feel like they're stuck in, and can be difficult to move through until we invite in this piece of, it makes sense. I promise that you're not broken, or that there's something innately wrong with you. But even though our dysfunction can show up in so many different ways, it all does feed into one fabric understanding that, for me, Somatics has provided. It, to me, it feels like a very clear map of how we've all stemmed from these different experiences, but the body does compensate in patterns. And diving into that language, I think that there is a lot of self-validation and self-actualization that can happen when we can point to and understand, like, I resonate with this is very much the way that I respond. Having language for that, I think, can do so much in letting the weight off your shoulders of this isn't just some mystical problem that's just wrong with me, but part of a bigger conversation where actually all of this gets to make sense.
Amidst the whole tapestry of human existence and confronting the paradox of dysfunction within the natural order, as we grapple with anxiety and emotional reactivity and existential turmoil, you prompt us to explore the root cause of our suffering, whether they stem from generational trauma, societal conditioning, or the limitations of the ego. And through this exploration, I find myself confronting the reality of energetic blocks, obstacles that hinder my ability to harmonize with the universal flow of energy, and how that impedes my journey towards wholeness. How do societal conditioning and generational trauma contribute to the formation of energetic blocks within our bodies? And how can we begin to unravel and release these blocks?
I would say that both of those things, societal conditioning and generational trauma, really point to environmentally shaping factors. Societal conditioning, this can stem from anything from the influences that your teachers, your community members, or social media can put on you, which we all know at any age, but especially in early age, is just incredibly influential in shaping the way that we look at the world. Generational trauma, I think, is a really interesting one too, because I don't know if it is always perceived so much as environmental, but it's interesting to see how events compound through generations and how different layers through processing these historically challenging events or whatever it is that our ancestors have gone through, that the generations following that will compensate. It just makes sense how people end up in the conclusions that they do, or the patterns that they found themselves to be in, to cope with things that they may not have had the skill set to do so in perhaps the most optimal way. And I think that can be really interesting and can be something that can provide so much healing to take a deeper look at. I do find that generational trauma to be such an interesting thing to study, how the conjoining of factors throughout time, how much they have shaped lineages, with things like addiction or abuse, illness even, can all be connected back to things happening that were outside of people's controls, things like famines or wars, like really traumatic events that people went through where they had no control and no means to cope with it, and how that has cascaded forward through generations. And so getting back to what is it that we do about that, again, inviting that spaciousness and compassion that these people, or as that relates to generational or societal, I firmly believe are always only doing the best that we can with the knowledge or the skills that we have. And if people were not given the opportunity or met in a way where they felt they could work on their skill set of coping, then is that fair for me to hold that against them and to hold them personally responsible for not being given the tools that they needed to be better? I don't think so. I think that just as much as I am, quote unquote, a victim of my experience, that there was only so much control over I had of what I went through, that is also extended to everyone else around me. So yeah, I think that inviting in some of that compassion and that recognition that we're all in the same boat, in that sense, that we are all only doing the best that we can with what we have to work with. For some people, they may have more to work with than others, and who's to say that's fair or whatever, but it's just the way that things tend to shake out. I'm not going to hold that against people. And then taking personal responsibility, I think, is the next really big piece to this, because it can be so easy to fall back into the victimhood of this terrible thing happened to me, and sitting in that and letting that be your story. And I think that there is a personal tipping point that each person needs to come to, where you can no longer tolerate sitting in that space anymore, where it's okay, maybe something really unfair and terrible did happen to me that I didn't deserve, but nobody else is going to be fixing this problem but me. Nobody else can fix this but me. There is a stepping up in a sense that I think, again, is an act of really deep self-love, that I am going to step up and put myself out there and really claim what I want for myself, even if it's really hard and even if it's really scary, to take a look at what it is that I've been collecting over the years or have inherited from society or generational trauma, and embrace that this is my soul's curriculum, that this is what I am here to work on, and opening yourself up to this is a journey, an interactive journey with spirit, in my opinion, to work through. This is what I've been given. And I believe that it's here for a reason, that this is here as medicine to help you self actualize, to help you transcend all the suffering that is available. There's plenty of suffering available for here for us to wallow in if we so choose to, but there's also always the opportunity to instead learn to work with it, to engage with it. And I think adopting that mindset of curiosity of what is it that I am meant to be extracting from this situation that I'm finding resistance in, not only invites more fun, but truly accelerates the process of moving beyond what has kept you stuck in the pain and the wallowing. That I think can be just so beautiful in moving through that sense of stuckness and those energetic blocks. So again, like learning the language of the body, giving yourself some spaciousness to feel through the sensation of the pain that you're holding without getting stuck in the story of it, which I know we'll get into in a later episode with somatic traps. That can be a really tricky thing to delineate the differences between. But it is giving the body space, bringing language to experience to help us better understand, to be able to emotionally detach from the convictions that we might feel about the way situations unfolded or people who may have wronged us in the past. That really helps us unhook, transcend, let go, and move through that baggage, the emotional pain that we have inherited from one source or another.
In terms of strategies or practices that you would recommend for individuals who are seeking to overcome emotional reactivity and cultivate greater alignment with the universal flow of energy, are there any simple strategies or practices that someone who's listening to this could do right now in their living room or in their office or wherever that they happen to be?
The first two things that come to mind that I think actually do hold each other's hands really beautifully, firstly, would be adopting some sort of meditation practice. And I know it was an intention of ours, Peter, to include a practice with every episode that we release, something that is tangible for people to take away and immediately begin implementing into their daily life. So the first one I would say is meditation. And if you don't have a meditative practice, I find that it can be really challenging for people to sit on a mat, crisscross, and simply watch the mind. It can be really frustrating, and I don't think that lands with a lot of people. It's certainly not a way that I have been successful in practicing meditation. But something that I do find incredibly helpful is sitting with really good questions that force me to be reflective of the nature of my thinking. Some questions that I wanted to share in that line that I think can help prompt people into beginning a meditative practice, if that's not something that they already have, is to first consider, do you come up with everything that you think? Are you the source of all of the thoughts that you have? And if you are completely connected to the ego, immediately right away, you might say, yes, of course I come up with everything that I think. But if we can sit with that information a little bit, I think we can recognize that there are actually very many different textures and flavors of thought, some that can arise as gut feelings, that these are things that we know, we deeply know, but we might not be able to explain logically how we know these things, how we came to these conclusions. It is a sense in the body of that deep knowing. Another example is spontaneous thought. You can be stuck on a problem, and then if you're taking a break from it, you're cooking dinner, all of a sudden something drops into your mind that's like the clarity. You've solved the entire problem. It's just dropped in. It's not something that you really muscled your way through egoically to figure out, but it more or less, it came to you. To me, there is an implication. There's intelligence beyond ourselves, beyond the ego. And it comes back to that radio analogy that I think that there is something that we, higher consciousness, that we are picking up on, and our bodies are simply a conduit of tuning into that frequency where we're tapping into the intelligence that is behind or beyond us. So the meditative questions that I have, so the first one being, do I come up with everything that I think? But once we've come to that conclusion, gathering our own evidence of the ways that perhaps that's not really true. Perhaps intelligence does show up for me in some ways, and I am given beautiful insights and intuition that maybe I don't get to take responsibility for personally. Is identifying the differences in quality in those things, being able to articulate to yourself in your own language, creating your own understanding of what that looks like. Where do these examples show up for me? And taking the time to clarify that to yourself does so much, and being able to pick up those examples when they show up in your daily life. So I would say considering those as a prerequisite to developing the meditative practice of helping us witness the mind is a really beautiful and simple way to start. Another one, when it comes to perhaps if it's just like an in the moment where like you're sitting at your desk at work and you're feeling perhaps overwhelmed or really constricted with stress, and you're looking for something to invite in that spaciousness rather quickly, something I have found so impactful for me has been the power of breath work and having some breath practices that connect you back into your body and consciously moving energy through the body in the way that the body gets to release and express. And there are so many different breath patterns that people can try to find what works best for their system. There are some people who are going to feel more drawn to breaths that create a lot of fire and move a lot of energy. And then there are going to be people like me, for example, who much prefer the slower breaths, the calming breaths. My personal favorite is called the waterfall breath. One of my personal favorites to help me drop back into my body and calm down, which involves being in a comfortable position, closing your eyes, and then you're visualizing a ball bouncing back and forth between your root and into your third eye. So you're following your breath you can exhale from your third eye, tracking that ball going through your body as it travels down into your root. And when you inhale, visualize that ball traveling from the root back up into your third eye. So there's like a rhythmic pacing where you're also tracking the sensation in your body as that breath is moving through. That one, it brings you in, it brings you closer to yourself, and regulating that breathing and forcing yourself to slow down and connect just does a lot to shift the energy and regulate the nervous system to be in that state of spacious ease and calmness. So yeah, I would say meditation and perhaps trying out a breath pattern or two to move that energy and really develop that sense of self-connection can be two beautiful practices that are accessible to anyone at any time.
That's beautiful, Jenny. Thank you so much for that. I know first thing in the morning, 2 minutes, literally 2 minutes of a body scan and another couple of minutes of breath work is sufficient enough for me to be able to move into the day with intention and with purpose, as distinct from the day moving into me. Because I recognize when I'm at my desk, especially with podcasting and coaching, is that I'm upper thorax breathing. And I don't recognize that, oh, hang on a second, I haven't breathed into my rib cage, into my abdomen. And they've all been very short breaths. When I take just 2 minutes, because I think many people think of it's like a gym routine. Oh, I've got to spend an hour, or meditation. I've got to sit in meditation for hours. I've got to sit in a certain way. You can do it at your desk. You can do it when you get up in the morning. Those two practical exercises are beautiful because they're simple, they're practical, they're effective, and they can set the tone for your day. For listeners who start to embody these practices, such as, say, body scans and breathing, breath work, how does that help individuals develop a deeper understanding of their internal patterns and experiences?
I think for so many people before that they've began perhaps developing an introspective practice, spend so much experience living out of the head, out of the mind, out of the ego, that our energy is very directed into the head. And there really isn't very much sensational awareness of what is going on in the body. And so beginning to start these practices is reawakening that connection. Your body has information for you and it's experiencing a lot throughout the day. And it has so much information that it's asking for you to make decisions based off of that I think a lot of us have somewhat severed our connection to unconsciously. And developing these practices is really like that reconnection. And something that you may perhaps expect to experience is just noticing, oh my gosh, there's actually a lot happening here. I'm noticing there's like a ball that's of tightness that sits in my stomach, or pressure on my chest, or like a fluttering in my solar plexus, or perhaps even noticing like my legs are really numb. I don't really feel too much in there, and getting curious what that's about. There's a lot more sensation that can come online when we begin to engage with the body more. I think it can be really helpful to normalize that feeling a lot of sensation in the body is more what life is supposed to feel. Like your body is supposed to feel this alive. It doesn't mean that you have a lot of baggage that's coming up right now trying to be expressed, but we're supposed to be this connected to the body, and the body is supposed to be feeling so much throughout the day. And perhaps now we're only just beginning to get in touch with that and notice that. So I wouldn't be concerned if that's something that you notice, or even if you feel a lot of numbness and you're doing these practices and actually you're not feeling very much of anything, that also is not a sign that you're doing something wrong or something is wrong with you, but is another invitation of what is this about? That can be a very common sign of a freeze response, of the energy is just frozen in the body and it does not want to let things move until we can learn to thaw that out and work through that in the way that it feels like it needs to be expressed. Letting your journey be unique to you, not having expectation for how things need to go, how they need to flow, what the timeline needs to look like. The body has its own intelligence. It doesn't need to follow any sort of script from the ego about how things need to evolve. So just trusting that your body is such a beautiful source of intelligence, and it will move and process things at the rate that it has the capacity to. This is all really just a journey of developing that reconnection and learning how to work with each other, that I think is such a beautiful thing to be a part of, and to recognize that you get to do this. You get to develop this connection with yourself and get to know yourself in a way that just blew beyond any notion of what I thought this was going to be like. It's a really beautiful journey for people to start to engage with.
That's the beauty of it, because the body's always in the present. It's your mind that can be in the past or in the future. But when you work with the body, it brings you into that present and presence, because I always say how you flow is how you glow. and I really see you as a steward of somatic wisdom, because you guide others on their journey towards self-discovery and empowerment, and to reclaim their physiological sovereignty. Can you share a personal epiphany or transformative moment that solidified your commitment to somatic practice and healing?
Yeah, as you were sharing that, I was reflecting actually on just how much this work has shaped and changed me. Again, has blown past any notions of what I thought was going to be possible for myself. Yeah, growing up, I was a very quiet kid, very quiet. Did not raise my hand in school ever. Did not engage with people unless they engaged with me first. I was just not one to get out of my comfort zone at all if I could help it. And as I became an adult, I saw just how much that was holding me back, that I did not feel comfortable seizing opportunities or advocating for myself. And it led to me feeling like I was in a lot of imbalanced relationships and really dissatisfied with the direction that my life was going. And there was just so much internal conflict there, because a much deeper part of me knew how capable I was, how smart I was, the ambition that I had, the dreams that I wanted to fulfill. That was very real to me. And I knew that there was a really beautiful person underneath this conditioning that was, don't rock the boat. Don't do anything that's going to make people want to look at you, because you don't want to give them any reason to get in trouble, which was a big fear of mine, that I just could not tolerate conflict. So I compensated by doing everything in my control to not give anyone a reason to have conflict with me, which, resulted in me being a shell of a person. I didn't have anything to offer to the world because of that. And I didn't understand that initially. I don't understand why there's such a wall here that I can't break through to show up as the person that I know that I am. And I hated the person I was portraying myself to be to the rest of the world, because of that lack of information and that lack of connection of like, why I was responding this way is what led to all of that internal conflict and restriction. I turned that against myself and really resented who I was. And it was through making these connections about how my early life experience shaped my fear of conflict. And it makes total sense that if you grow up in an environment with conflict and you don't have any control over that, making yourself as small as possible to stay out of the way of that conflict, of the debris of chaos, it makes sense that I did that. And I have a lot of respect for my body's intelligence to have done that. It served me at that time. But as an adult, it was my responsibility to learn the skills to leave behind those stories that I can handle conflict now. I am competent enough to advocate for myself, and perhaps not every experience that I am perceiving as being dangerous or potentially rife with conflict actually has conflict. It was amazing for me to recognize how much fear I was carrying throughout my life, where I was constantly perceiving other people to be potentially argumentative or quote unquote dangerous to me, that I had to be on guard, when really that didn't exist. That was all of my past experience coloring the way I was perceiving the present moment. I got to release that fear and realize I can ask for what I want, and I can show up as the person that I want to and advocate for myself and go after big things. And that does not mean that people are going to be out to get me, out to hurt me, shut me down, or say no. That if I'm working with the flow of life and following my intuition, things are actually working out really well for me following that path of doing what feels right. I am not going to be meeting a tremendous amount of resistance or roadblocks to do these things. And I could have never believed, if you had told me even 10 years ago that public speaking would be part of my job, that I would be working for myself. That vulnerability in those things was so inconceivable for me to have the capacity to do. And I owe it all to somatic work, working through those layers of that deep freeze. It just felt like paralysis. That doesn't have to be my reality anymore. And I could have never imagined that I would be in this space to be able to do this type of work with this type of emotional range. It's such a beautiful gift. And that's why I'm so passionate about it, is I think a lot of people can relate to that experience of deep down knowing their truth about who they are, but feeling like there's so much challenge in how do I connect these two things, the way that I know that I am versus the way that I have practiced showing up my entire life. And if you don't have that language and you don't have that framework of understanding, it can feel so hard to figure out how to make that path. And that is my passion. Being a Sherpa of these things, like bringing people to the place that they want to be, that there is connection. And I've walked this path, and like I will do everything that has helped me and the skill set that I've developed to help you get there too, to help make sense of that experience and process the things that need to be processed for that to be possible.
When people are in that situation and they cannot articulate what is happening, it's like trying to grab fog.
Yeah, totally.
You can't quite get a grip or a purchase on it. And your experiences of what I call a siege mentality, the moat is up, the archers are at the turrets, and everything is contracted and on alert. When you open up the doors and the archers put their bows down and people start to relax a little bit and you get more air coming in, breezing through that castle, you're no longer under siege anymore because you start to relax. And we know that as not the fight, flight, freeze syndrome, but more of the parasympathetic aspect of your human design. And now you're in this place. How do you envision it shaping the lives of those that you serve?
I think it mirrors so much of the experience that I have had personally, of being able to bring to fruition the person that I always knew that I was. It feels like so many things just click into place as you go through this journey of really making sense of memories, or having passions that you had as a child come back to you rather spontaneously. These gifts that we have of what it is that we're meant to bring into the world fall into alignment when we can work through the blocks that may have created some space from us with them, where things are falling back into alignment, things are coming back into congruence, where things can move more seamlessly. And that's something that I've seen with a lot of the people that I work with, is that they feel like their lives fall into order more than they had before, of recognizing purpose. I think is a huge one. So many people come to me wanting to find their purpose. I feel like I have so much passion, but I don't know where to put it. I don't know what I'm meant to be doing here. That's such a beautiful question to bring to the table of what am I meant to do? Somatic work is everything, at least in my opinion, in helping people figure that out. Because even in the structure of that sentence, what am I meant to do? The I comes first. And if you don't have clarity on who the I is, how can we know what the I is meant to do, which is the focus on purpose? And so bringing clarity and fruition, that person who you know that you're meant to be, and watching yourself embody that person and truly step into that power, the do falls into place easily after that, because the things are coming online. You're getting pointed into the direction of alignment, where you just notice like life is showing you exactly where it is that you're meant to be right now. But when you're fighting all of this inner constriction and conflict and old outdated patterns, like you mentioned earlier, there's so much murkiness in trying to move through that it can be so hard to find purpose, more like finding a needle in a haystack rather than come into fruition of the person that you're meant to be. The needle comes to you. It all just comes to you, and you don't have to work so hard or strive so hard to figure it out. It is the process of you magnetizing what is meant to you. That is just like an incredible gift for people to be able to experience for themselves, is to feel deeply settled into the congruence of their lives, of knowing that this is where I am meant to be, and feeling so empowered to be in that space. It's something that I've been able to witness a lot of people move through. Side tangents to this, watching people strengthen family relationships is one that means a lot to me as well through this work, being able to bring compassion to the people who really know how to push our buttons the most and forgive them for, like I mentioned earlier, perhaps not having the skill set that they needed to work through their own self. And am I going to hold that against them, that they didn't have those opportunities? And being able to separate those things and look at the people in the pain that they're sitting in the space of what it is that is their work to work through, and not holding that against them. It changes the nature of the dynamics of those relationships in a much healthier and, I think, more objective way to approach those types of things. I feel like our society is drifting to be a little bit more like individualistic and isolated. Finding these strategies to bring deeper sense of connection, I think, is just so needed right now. And being able to do that and provide the framework for people to better relate to those that they love and care about is such a beautiful gift as well that just gets to come from this. It seems like a lot of avenues of my life are just getting better because I have focused on clearing my channel or tuning into that higher radio frequency and learning how to work with the curriculum that I'm given, the intuition that I'm receiving to change my life and give me direction.
You mentioned being magnetized, and if you get a magnet, all the molecules in the magnet face different ways, so different directions. But if you wrap a copper wire around it and you put a higher charge through it, the higher charge being somatic wisdom, then all the molecules face in the same direction. So you get an alignment because there is a higher charge going through it. Whereas if you're going around with your day-to-day distracted, being distracted by the next shiny object syndrome, the next course, the next guru, the next coach, or whatever, the next personal development program, whatever it may be, if there isn't that higher charge, which could also be your standards and your principles and your values and the foundation that you have that goes through that magnet, then you're going to be all over the place. But when that higher charge does come through, which in this context, somatic wisdom and somatic practice, whether it's breath work or the meditation practices, the beautiful practices that you spoke about, is that you become magnetized to a purpose. I see that's what's going on with your life, is you've cleared the channels, you've got this higher charge coming through you because you've got a clear straw. It's now pulling the needle towards you. So in effect, you are being subpoenaed by a higher charge to be able to birth something into the collective. And when you do that, you start to recognize that you are divinely tethered.
I think that is somewhat the inevitable conclusion that a lot of these different types of practices which isn't just limited to somatic experience, of course, but as you work through whatever methodology suits you of transcending suffering, that I think that is the conclusion that we come to, is that we are spiritual beings having an earthly experience, that I don't need to be so identified with my body, with this space, but really looking at it as this is like the play I get to work with right now. This is just the curriculum that I get to move through, that I've karmically inherited. This is what I get to play with right now. That is such a different and beautiful and expansive place to live your life from, where you do feel like it's so much easier to sit on that ball of inner peace and clarity when you have that unattachment to, like, I recognize that all of this is impermanent and doesn't necessarily mean very much. This is my place to play and work through what I came here to work through, to carry on for the next iteration. At least that's my belief around it. But yeah, once you can recognize that layer of divinity, I think in this whole system, that there's a lot of elegance in how the system was designed that for me feels undeniably spiritually divine, that makes such a big impression and really changes the way that you're looking and engaging with the world around you. And in my opinion, only for the better, that gets to light the other people around you with that energy that you're holding, that you can be the model for them of these influences or projections from other people does not have to be a good enough reason to knock me off of my center, that this is something that I can also continue to take in stride through practicing that acceptance of, yeah, it's here. These things are here. I am going through this situation or dealing with this type of person. And I don't have to give that permission to be enough reason for me to fall into patterns of suffering, but stay open to what is. For me, that feels pretty godly, to have that expansion of awareness, of that calm, centered, regardless of whatever is will be type of embodiment. And while that can be incredibly challenging to practice all of the time, it is a practice that I do feel is the purpose of what we're all here to cultivate for ourselves.
You leave us with a profound realization that the body is this design, this human design, this body, this complex is not a passive vessel, but it's really a dynamic conduit for the expression of spirit. And through somatic awareness and practice, it's clear to me that we have the power to transcend those energetic blocks that you were talking about and to cultivate alignment with the universal flow of energy and set our feet upon the path of profound self-discovery and empowerment. That's something, as we continue to delve into the transformative potential of somatic practice and embrace the power of embodied consciousness, when we look ahead, what do you envision as the next steps in our collective journey towards somatic healing and self-discovery?
For me, I am watching somatic work starting to become a little bit more of like mainstream conversation, which is incredibly exciting because I haven't been in this game for too terribly long myself. But even from when I started, nobody knew what I was talking about if I was to tell them what it is that I do. And now people do have a little bit more felt sense of what it is that I'm talking about. And that is so cool. To me, what I envisioned being the next step really pertains to this conversation that we're having now, and why I feel it's so important to get this message out, that somatic work isn't just the nitty gritty, the here and now of the body, but it is the spiritual component that is the connection to it, that almost feels like the life force behind the body experience. That these two things, at least to me, hold each other's hands so strongly. It invites so much more dimensionality to the conversation to understand. And that feels really important to me, to get this conversation out, that there is very much a spiritual component alive in this work that I hope people can see and experience for themselves. For me, that has made so much of a difference and has invited in so much aliveness to the way that I show up in my life, to have that spiritual interplay to my somatic understandings. So I would love to see that be the next step. I think that's something that we're really missing out on in the Western world, is that sense of spiritual connection that I think has led to a lot of the individualistic and isolated tendencies we have, is we don't feel connected to ourselves, to each other, to this earth, and our purpose for being here. To me, furthering that conversation moving into the next phase of, yes, the body is incredible and have so much reverence and respect for it, but not just limiting that to the biology of what's going on in different nervous system states. You can throw out all the textbook terms, but also inviting into the divine for that conversation too, because that is very much part of this design.
In this conversation, I'm filled with a very deep sense of gratitude for the wisdom and insight you shared with us today. And through your profound understanding of somatic practice and healing, you've illuminated the path towards greater self-awareness, empowerment, and transformation. I really want to thank you for guiding us on this journey of self-discovery and healing, because your passion really shines through for somatic wisdom and your commitment to helping others unlock their true potential. And for listeners, I think it's important to reflect on the insights and practices shared by Ginny today. And as we continue to explore the transformative power of somatic practice in the episodes to come, I trust that you find inspiration and guidance in your journey towards healing and self-discovery. Remember, true transformation begins within. And when we cultivate somatic awareness and embracing the wisdom of this design, of this human body, we have the power and the agency to unlock our true potential so we can live with greater authenticity, live with purpose, and live with joy. I really want to thank you, Ginny, for taking the time to join us today in the first of these episodes. Do you have any parting words?
I would just love to say thank you so much for inviting me to take up some space in this conversation. It feels like such an important message to share, and to be able to play a small part in that just feels so important to me. I suppose one little side note that I do think is important for people to understand if they're just beginning this journey is to really find a body of work that speaks to you, and building a understanding that resonates with you, building your own language that identifies with your experience, not just taking on what other people tell you, but really infusing your own experience and understandings into it yourself. It doesn't matter how many books you read or how many people that you listen to speak, but if you can't find a way to integrate that into your own individualism and having your own personal reverence and understanding for this work, it's just not going to be able to land in the most meaningful and impactful way. So if you feel like something doesn't totally click for you within these conversations, play with it, find your own language for it, infuse your own experiences, make this work for you. This is such an individualistic journey to go on to make it workable for you. Don't be afraid to change things up and take what works, leave what doesn't. This is very much your journey. Make it work for you. Don't feel like you need to conform to somebody else's boxes for it to be right.
And where can people find you, Ginny?
I am on Instagram primarily, which is at Ginny Hoyt on Instagram. And I have a website, www.ginnyhoyt.com, with information about my practice and services.
I hope you've enjoyed today's conversation with Ginny Hoyt and found inspiration in her insights into the transformative power of somatic practice. And as we continue this journey together, I invite you to explore the upcoming episodes with Ginny, where we will delve deeper into the topics such as awakening the mind-body connection, building your somatic foundation, and becoming your own healer, and much more. So again, thank you so much, Ginny, for coming on the Transcendent Minds podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Peter. This was a lot of fun to have a conversation around.
That's it for today's episode of Transcendent Minds. We hope you enjoyed this exploration of the mysteries of the mind and the human experience. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes, we would love to hear from you. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts. And if you feel inclined, please leave a rating and a review, as this goes a long way. And follow us on social media to stay up to date with the latest episodes. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, keep transcending your mind.